Hi there, can you hear us?
Yes, hello. So, wow, this is our Facebook Live again. So, hi, this is Priscilla from Speakers Connect. Today, we're very happy to have best-selling authors Andrew Grant and Gaia Grant with us. Andrew and Gaia are best known for their bestsellers, Who Killed Creativity and How to Get It Back, and The Innovation Race. Through their consulting company, Tyrion, they have also decided over 30 corporate leadership programs and used by many multinational companies. So today we'll explore with them the realities of remote working. It is not as simple as just asking people to work from home. There's a lot we can learn from them. So Andrew and Gaia, thank you for your time today.
Thanks so much, Priscilla.
In last time in our Facebook Live, we have NASA astronaut Leroy Chow with us. So when we talk about remote working, we can learn a lot from astronauts working in space. What do you think about that?
Well, that's right, Priscilla. Long before we all got forced to work from home, they have been doing lots of research about astronauts in space because they now have the budget to get people to Mars, and they now have the technical ability to get people to Mars. So they've gone through their needs analysis and their SWOT plans and realized they've got all the ability to fly people to Mars. And when they're looking at the greatest chance of the Mars mission not working or failing, is actually going to be how they choose the 4 people to work together in an isolated and confined environment. So they will be a virtual team away from planet Earth for 3 years. And one of the questions we like to ask people is, if you look around at your virtual team, let's say a small group of 3 or 4 of you, if you were put together in a small spaceship, maybe the size of a garage or 2, how long would you last with them for? So I think the lesson from this is, it's all very well to have the hardware and it's all very well to have the strategy, but the greatest risk of a team failing is actually the choice of who you choose. And it actually poses some interesting questions. If you were to send 4 people to Mars for 3 years, would you choose 4 women or 4 men, or 2 women and 2 men? Or some of the men out there are thinking, well, I'll choose 1 man and 3 women.
And I'd choose 4 women.
Jane would choose 4 women and get the job done with. But there are all sorts of really, really challenging questions that we would normally not have to ask ourselves. And I think the same thing is applying now for a virtual team. Many companies think that they can just recreate the office space back at home or online, giving people a phone and a laptop and not realizing the dangers and the dynamics of the new virtual team. So some of the research we've been doing for 20 years is inspired by the concept of the greatest failure of going to Mars is once you push that button, it's going to be the team dynamics and nothing more and nothing less. Where do people get research from that? And we've designed a program called On Thin Ice because it was looking at people going to Antarctica is actually where they've had the most research on virtual teams.
Yeah, and it's actually billions of dollars at risk if that Mars mission is not successful. So they really have to do their research well. And as Andrew said, they've looked actually at Antarctic expeditions because that's example on Earth of where people are really living in isolated and confined environments. A lot of these missions go to Antarctica over the winter over period for 9 months where there is complete darkness. A lot of the base stations they can drop from hundreds of people right down to 20 or 30 people, and they're living in darkness without seeing anyone else, without much communication with the outside world.
Sounds like some of us now.
Which is what a lot of us are probably feeling like right now. And so they found that's fascinating research to look at what happens under those conditions. And what somebody called Dr. Jack Stuster did was he looked at the diaries of people working in these conditions and he analysed what people were saying. And he found that people started to get paranoid. They started to get this death stare with the people they were working with. They were starting to feel resentment towards headquarters. And they were starting to feel like they were alone. And this is very, very similar to what a lot of people in space would experience. but it's also a lot of what a lot of people in isolated environments working from home will be experiencing.
And funnily enough, when he looked at all the diary entries of hundreds and hundreds of people over decades, he discovered, as we've discovered in our working with teams and now virtual teams, is the greatest issue was communication. And communication was bigger than every other issue put together. So when you take a team, and we've been working with functional and dysfunctional teams for many years now, trying to help them learn to work more efficiently. When you take that team and then virtualize it, the problems don't go away. Actually, they get compounded. And therefore, if a team has communication issues and alignment issues when they're working face to face, once that team becomes virtualized, those communication and alignment issues don't go away, they actually get worse.
Exacerbated.
Yeah, and therefore we feel that it's really important for people to talk about these issues and find an environment where they can deal with the communication issues. So if you tuned in for this to be a practical session on how to use Zoom and how to set your camera and microphone up, you're in the wrong place, because we want to go deeper. We want to go under the ice and find out what are the real issues of virtual teams, the behavioral issues and the team dynamic issues.
Certainly. And we are also kind of in the dark, right, in this COVID situation. And it's changing so many things. What do you think, I mean, it has done to us and our workplaces? I remember you once mentioned that this is going to be a reset. So can we learn more about that?
Well, that's right. It's been coming for a long time, and what COVID has done is forced a lot of people to be innovative and maybe use this crisis as an opportunity. And therefore, we're now forced into virtual teams, and we're wondering what will happen when or if things get back to normal and what the new normal will look like. But I think what's happening is many managers didn't think, or many leaders didn't think that they could manage people without seeing them and staring over their shoulder and micromanaging them. And they felt that that was the only way to lead. What they're realizing now is people can work effectively from home. Some people work better from home. They've got the ability to manage their time and their kids and everything else. And therefore, some of the companies are now realizing, hey, this is not as bad as we thought it was. Twitter are now saying, Jack Dorsey is now saying that you can stay and work from home as long as you like. Now that's a smart move, because real estate in Silicon Valley is extremely expensive, both for the company and it's also expensive for the employees that work there. Therefore, they have to pay high salaries due to the cycle of the expenses. If that gets removed from the equation, no longer will people have to be physically located in a particular place to be able to be a great employee. Now that's good news for some and bad news for others. It now means that that tiny little apartment you had in Hong Kong Central that was worth thousands of dollars a month rent or a week rent, now you can go and live it wherever you like. That's the good news is. The bad news is you are now opening yourself up competitively as an employee to every single person on the planet. And if there is cheaper labor across the channel in another country, and it's higher quality and it works better on virtual teams, companies like Twitter are no longer going to be restricted to employing people just in Silicon Valley. So if you put a futuristic element on this, you'll soon start to see that we may become obsolete because of where we live. And therefore, we now realize that we can manage people virtually. And what we will go on to talk about today is how to do that effectively. And I know that's one of your next questions, Priscilla.
Sure.
How do we manage teams effectively? And are virtual teams better or worse? Well, we'll give you the good news and bad news there as well. But the most important thing now is it will be a complete reset. I think companies will start changing their workforce, changing who they employ, and that will be great news for some and horribly scary for others, which means we all need to get upskilled on working as a virtual team and leading and managing a virtual team.
So in that case, what leaders should understand is, I mean, obviously working from home, virtual teams is not just replacing the physical office. So what leaders should pay attention to?
Well, here's the challenge. As I said, there are the CEO of WordPress, who's been working on virtual teams for a long time, has got a model that he calls the 5 levels of distributed team. And the first level is no deliberate action, which is what many of us have been doing for a long time. As soon as we got our smart devices, we were able to discover that we could work from our car and our laptops. And that really is a very temporary thing between bouts in the office. And then the next level was recreating the office online. And again, that's still a very dangerous level, because you're expecting to function the same way as you did in the office, which means you're still having conference calls with 20 people, which are totally useless and a waste of time for many, many people. And then he moves on to adapting to the medium, where that virtual team can start taking advantage of the virtuality and start working better than they did in an office. Finally, 2 more stages leads to asynchronous communication, which means the virtual team can now work in their own time, their own space. They've got their own management, and now they're working much more effective than the office. And finally, nirvana, where the team will work better than any other possible team could work in the office. But unfortunately, most teams are stuck at simply recreating the office online and not realizing that different dynamics take place and different things will need to change.
And it's going to be very hard to reach that nirvana state, obviously, because of the challenges, the not being physically co-located, not being able to read body language, not being able to sort of just turn to the person next to you and ask a clarification question.
So have they got statistics on virtual teams? You're our researcher.
A lot going backwards and forwards. So the latest research, which is coming out of MIT in Sloan Review, says that 82% of virtual teams are not succeeding, which is a huge number.
So if I was a manager, it used to be 50%, but it's now up to...
It's now risen.
So if I was a manager, it's like flipping a coin, isn't it? You're going to work virtually and you've got a 50-50 chance of being successful or not. That's totally unacceptable.
Now it's an 82 to 12%. So it's... I think what the COVID situation has done is it's forced this, it has to be a new reality. We have to learn to adapt. So people are learning how to improve their communication. And I think there are certainly resources like Zoom that are helping it to be more personable, so we can see the person and we can...
Oh, but you've got millennials that put themselves on a video loop and then go and have a coffee. So I think, you know, we've really got to work out, how do you engage people and how do you have effective meetings virtually? And as I said, it's no thinking you can send people home and continue with the bad processes. And we need to create the opportunity for people to practice and look and explore and examine those dynamics that are going to get worse in the virtual situation.
Sure. So how can we get better with the virtual teams? Any practices that we can do? Any tips for us?
Well, look, there are lots of lists of what to do in a virtual team and how to run conference calls. But what we want to do is create what we're calling a facilitated online experience, where we actually help a virtual team look at its own dynamics. So we want to create a practice field or a safe environment. We've designed a game called the Virtual Navigation Game as part of our On Thin Ice program. And it's a simulation where we look at the dynamics of a team working together in a fun environment where they've got to geo-guess themselves around the world. And then what we're trying to work out is, how are those dynamics working? Now, what are some of the dynamics you see when people play the game?
Oh, there's really, really interesting things emerge. And it comes up quite quickly because it's a really concentrated practice opportunity in a safe environment to see these dynamics, and then it's a chance to debrief them and discuss what's going on. But some of the things that I've discovered in my own research, I've looked into what makes a future-ready leader and what makes a future-ready team. And so I've been fascinated to look at, first of all, there's this really important concept of ambidexterity, which means that a future-ready individual and a future-ready team needs to be able to deal with competing demands. So it's not going to be straightforward. You will, for example, you will need to, in the virtual environment, provide the freedom for people to be able to come online at different times, to be able to manage their projects independently and so on. But at the same time, it's a paradox. They will also need some controls. So they will need some discipline, some guidelines on how to do that. Otherwise, too much freedom is dangerous. It becomes chaotic. But this is why these two areas need to be held in tension. At the other extreme, too much control can become oppressive. So you don't want to, have to be logging in at a certain time every day and have to have everything checked.
Be micromanaged.
Be micromanaged. So how do you become ambidextrous as a leader to provide both of those? And as a team, how do you allow for both of those?
Well, I think the danger is we've been sent home and told to do it. And all these things that Jay is talking about, creating the right amount of freedom and control, they're not discussed. And so if you've got a controlling boss, that just gets amplified back in the virtual time. If you've got a boss that says log in whenever you like, then nothing gets done. We actually need to take teams through what we're calling a virtual practice field, where they can practice in a safe environment where their behaviors don't cost their jobs, don't cost their time, don't cost client challenges, and help them understand the issues of alignment. One classic example in a virtual team is you've got people that are really important about managing speed and they want to move things fast, and others that are managing accuracy and they want to slow things down and get it.
So there's another paradox.
Yeah. And if they don't discuss this, then it'll just be the dominant person that controls whether it's speed or accuracy. And there's plenty of times speed to market is more important than accuracy, but these things need to be discussed and understand the types of personalities in the team. So we can almost have a laugh at them rather than a cry when you lose that important client.
And so, yeah, that's an example of a paradox. And a paradox means that it's not either or language. It's not either we have speed or we have accuracy. You actually have to have both, and both simultaneously. And that becomes even more of a challenge in a virtual environment. So how do you manage both of those at the same time? Something else to consider in a virtual environment with ambidexterity is the paradox of collaboration and independence, because you have to be able to collaborate and continue to build on others' ideas effectively, but you also need a measure of independence so that people can continue to drive forward the results that need to be completed or achieved. And so there's another example of ambidexterity. Something else I identified in my research was that once you've identified what are those competing demands that you have to deal with, then how do you ensure there's more agility to move between those polar positions effectively and to balance them simultaneously? So ambidexterity was one of the important considerations. Agility was the second one for future-ready leadership and teams. And the third one was alignment. So how then do you ensure that teams, even though they're sometimes at different poles or in different positions, how do you ensure that they can find alignment around those differences?
So I think it's really important to get teams to talk about how they feel when they're in a virtual environment. And it's often interesting when we do some polling. And again, after doing a simulation where it's safe, we want to get them to talk about what are they feeling and get those out. Because if they don't get those issues out, then they just roll their eyes in contempt. And so we often want to get teams talking about the dynamics of their virtual team rather than just jumping in and thinking that they can perform the same. And so there are some questions that we like to ask to get them discussing it. And that's why we don't want to just dump people with information on how to be a virtual team. There's plenty of information online about that. But we want to stop and give teams the opportunity to explore and think about their specific team and the specific challenges that they have with their team.
Certainly. And yeah, I think either it is a physical office or a virtual team, our personality still shows, right? But without the physical office, you cannot really see people's response. So it's even harder to a certain extent.
Well, that means we need to talk about it more, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah, definitely. Any other best practices leaders or teammates should pay attention to?
Well, one of the things we do spot when we're working with teams, whether it's in a simulation or in real life, is, as I said, we tend to get the dominant person overbearing and then the quiet introvert person doesn't get a chance to talk. And often you get people in a virtual team saying, right, has everyone understood that point? And let's say there's 5 people in the team. Well, 3 people the 3 noisy people might answer back, yes, I understand it. 2 people don't answer. And then the boss goes on and says, great, let's keep going. Right. And then a week down the road, the boss might talk to one of the 2 people that didn't answer and say, hey, I thought we all agreed on this. And then what do? They didn't really agree on it, but they got overshadowed and over-dominated. So one of the practical things that's really important is to make sure when you when you say, does everyone understand this, that you go around one at a time. John, Jill, Bill, Wayan, do you understand all these? Make sure everyone has a chance to speak out. So you're not using, and typically a leader is going to be the more stronger personality. Very few people want to talk against it. I remember when we played the game with one person, they were guessing places around the world, and the leader, who was from England, said, this is definitely in the UK. Now, it wasn't in the UK, but because he was the leader and because he was from the United Kingdom, nobody was going to challenge and question him. And therefore, they failed in that particular round of the game because he was so strong in his language. So my question to leaders is, be careful when you say this is definitely, because no one underneath you is going to want to challenge you, particularly in the Asian context. So as leaders, we need to choose our words very carefully. And we may say, I think this is in the UK. What do you think? Allowing people to draw out what they believe is important rather than shutting them down. Jo, from your research?
Yes. Well, the other thing to remember is you still need to be able to maintain relationships, even though it's virtually. So you can't just assume that people are okay. You need to check in and ask them how they are going, how they are feeling. And you need to be able to relate to them as humans and not just as someone at the other end of the line who's going to get a task done for you. So that means checking in regularly. So having regular face-to-face connection through Zoom or through something, an online platform. And that means during that meeting time, don't just focus on the tasks that need to be done. Also spend time focusing on the people and how everybody is coping with the pressures and how they are feeling. And, you know, take time out to chat, to keep that relationship going, because there's so many of those opportunities to connect with people in the real office that can be lacking in the virtual office. We can sort of log in, get through the tasks, log out, and forget that there are real people there that we need to stay connected to.
Sure.
I think the other thing is it's really important to choose what method of communication works for everyone. Again, take time out and stop talk about these things. Don't just jump straight into here's what we've got to do. Whether it's Slack or Skype or Zoom or Messenger or Facebook, whatever, or phone, you know, and different generations will use different platforms. So it's really important to agree on what level of methodology you're going to use, what platform you're going to use. You may use WhatsApp for just quick chats, but don't write a whole essay on WhatsApp. And realize that some people are using their phone, other people are using their laptops. And I think these things need to be stopped and talked about. Teams need to take time out before they jump into their projects and talk about the dynamics of the team, how they're going to communicate, who's going to communicate, and the platforms that they're going to communicate on before they just jump in and start working their actual projects.
Sure. And there probably are a lot of economical reasons for companies to have the incentive to want to go fully virtual. So, but what do you think? Can virtual teams outperform office-based teams?
Well, I think the research is when they work well, when they've done what we've talked about and had a lot of that chance on practicing. I mean, you don't send athletes or musicians onto the stage or onto the track without practicing. Yet we send teams home and they don't practice. When they get a chance to practice and talk about it and get it all aligned and take that time out to invest the time becoming a team, then you can see they highly outperform a office-based team. And there are so many pros that go with it that you will have an employee for life, because if you can make it work and fit with their lifestyle. And it is interesting noticing that one research article that came out recently was that when they asked managers and leaders what their employees wanted, they said they thought they wanted just higher money. But when they asked employees what they wanted meaning in their life, they wanted training, and they wanted a balanced lifestyle. If a virtual team can give all those three things better than what an office can, then you will be able to attract the best employees. There is a war for talent, and your job out there as a leader is to make sure you've got the best employees, not your competitor. And therefore, you need to create an environment for your best employees. And if creating or offering a virtual environment for your best employees is what they want, give it to them, and they will be very faithful to you. And you will see that those teams will highly outperform the office-based teams if they work well. But remember what Jaya said, what percentage of
Well,
that is?
I was just going to say, let's see, it was 82%, the last measure that was done, study that was done.
82% passed.
82% failed, did not reach their objectives. But I would be really interested to see, now that we have to work virtually and we're learning how to do it better, whether those results would improve post-COVID.
Well, I think what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of dysfunctions, because they won't be watching this webinar, and they won't be reading books, and they won't be, that they'll just be working 24/7, which is the other danger, but inefficiently. And then I think and that could be the 82%, but then you could have 28% that are significantly better. So I think there'll be a real polarization with the virtual teams.
It's actually 12%.
12%. Okay. And then again, the other challenge will be, as I said, that anyone that is working in a bad environment will want to start working for good bosses and good leaders. So it's our job as leaders to create a great virtual environment. You used to have a cheap way to do that was Pizza Fridays and casual dress Fridays. I still found that a bit cheap and gimmicky. I don't think that was addressing the culture. However, virtually we need to create our own thing. And I wouldn't go for the cheap gimmicky versions, but we must create an environment that people enjoy working for the virtual team.
Sure. There's so much to learn, but I think given time and more practices, we should be doing better. So, but thank you today for the time. There's a lot of insights from you both, and research results, and 82%. So there's a long way to go. If audiences, if you're watching this Facebook Live and interested to learn more from Andrew and Gaia on how to manage virtual team better, by all means, contact us, and let's keep the conversation going on. But today, thank you very much for the time.
Thanks very much, Priscilla.
Thanks, Priscilla.
Thank
It was
you.
lovely
Take
to
care.
chat.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.